In 1161, Baldwin IV was born into the heart of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a land deeply entrenched in the conflicts between East and West. His father, King Amalric I, was one of the most prominent rulers of the Crusader state, renowned for his strategic brilliance and ambition to strengthen the kingdom. Amalric hailed from the noble Lusignan family, a European lineage with a storied history of knighthood and dominion. His mother, Agnes of Courtenay, belonged to the aristocratic Courtenay family, a French house with significant political influence in the Crusader states. Despite their noble roots, their marriage faced fierce opposition from political and religious factions. The nobles of the kingdom were strongly opposed to Amalric's wife, Agnes. They were likely threatened by the prospect of her increased influence. The High Court forced Amalric to agree to an annulment of his marriage on the grounds of consanguinity in order to be accepted as king. Amalric succeeded in having his and Agnes's children, Sibylla and Baldwin, declared legitimate despite the annulment. Baldwin's godfather was his paternal uncle, King Baldwin III, who joked that his christening present was the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The kingdom and other Crusader principalities, though surrounded by Arab Muslim states, were ruled by Franks, French-speaking Catholics who had arrived in the Levant from Western Europe and remained Western in culture. The king was young and recently married, making a nephew's accession seem unlikely. Yet Baldwin III died childless in 1163, Amalric was his heir. Before Baldwin IV's birth in 1161, the political and military landscape of the Levant was shaped by the aftermath of the First and Second Crusades, leaving the Kingdom of Jerusalem and surrounding regions in a precarious state. The First Crusade was launched in 1096, prompted by Pope Urban II's call to reclaim the Holy Land from Islamic control. After a grueling campaign, the Crusaders captured Jerusalem in 1099, establishing the Kingdom of Jerusalem as the political and religious center of their efforts. Alongside Jerusalem, other Crusader states, such as the Principality of Antioch, the County of Edessa, and the County of Tripoli, were founded, creating a fragile alliance of Christian-held territories. While the kingdom initially enjoyed success, it soon faced relentless threats from neighboring Islamic powers. The rapid expansion and limited resources of the Crusader states left them strategically vulnerable. The Kingdom of Jerusalem relied heavily on reinforcements and supplies from Europe, making it susceptible to European political turmoil. The Crusader states struggled to sustain a self-sufficient military and economy. Internally, the Muslim and Jewish populations under Crusader rule experienced heavy taxation and repression, fueling resentment and resistance. Externally, Islamic forces in the Levant and Egypt began organizing against the Crusaders. Despite internal divisions, leaders like Ahmad al-Din Zengi emerged to challenge Crusader dominance. Zengi's capture of Edessa in 1144 marked the first significant Muslim victory against the Crusaders and triggered the Second Crusade. The Second Crusade, led by King Louis VII of France and Emperor Conrad III of Germany, was launched to reclaim Edessa. However, poor coordination and internal conflicts led to a disastrous campaign. The crusade ended in failure, further weakening the Crusader states and emboldening Muslim forces. By the mid-12th century, the Muslim forces in the Levant were becoming increasingly unified. Nur al-Din Zengi, Ahmad al-Din's son, consolidated power in Aleppo and Damascus, creating a formidable front against the Crusaders. Nur al-Din also promoted the concept of jihad as both a religious and political tool to rally support for his cause. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Jerusalem grappled with internal divisions among its nobility and the constant threat of invasion. The kingdom's resources were stretched thin, and its leaders faced mounting challenges in maintaining their territories and defending against an increasingly coordinated enemy. By the time Baldwin IV was born, the Crusader states were in a state of constant defense, struggling to fend off the growing strength of Muslim leaders like Nur al-Din. The fragile stability of the Kingdom of Jerusalem foreshadowed the turbulent reign of Baldwin IV, who would inherit a realm in desperate need of unity and strong leadership. At the age of 6, Baldwin gained a stepmother, Maria Comnena, with whom he was not close. Queen Maria was an ambitious woman who likely saw Baldwin as an obstacle to her own children. King Amalric ensured that Baldwin, as the heir apparent to the kingdom, received a good education. The 9-year-old prince was sent to live with William of Tyre, a sophisticated and well-traveled cleric who was famed for his learning. William noticed that, unlike other children in the playground, Baldwin did not cry when pinched by his peers. After a while it became apparent to the tutor that Baldwin could not feel pain in his right arm. The king hired the Arab physician Abu Suleiman Dawood to treat Baldwin and another Arab, Abulker, to teach Baldwin horse riding, an essential skill for a Frankish nobleman. Having sensation in only one hand, Baldwin needed to learn to control the horse in battle using solely his knees, and mastered riding despite the handicap. Leprosy was suspected, but there were no visible symptoms yet, and physicians hesitated to diagnose because of the stigma the boy would face. Had such a diagnosis been made when he was a child, Baldwin might have been required by law to enter the Order of St. Lazarus, a military order composed of affected knights and sergeants. Amalric I of Jerusalem passed away on July 11, 1174, leaving the throne to his young, leprosy-stricken son. Amalric had been suffering from dysentery, a common and often fatal ailment in the medieval period, exacerbated by the poor sanitation and harsh conditions of the Levant. While he had shown resilience in his earlier campaigns and governance, his health began to deteriorate in the years leading up to his death. His illness likely worsened during the politically and militarily exhausting campaigns against Nur al-Din and the Muslim forces encroaching on the Crusader states. Despite these challenges, Amalric continued to govern actively, attempting to secure the kingdom's future. In the final weeks of his life, Amalric's condition became critical. The illness left him weakened, and he was unable to recover despite the medical knowledge of the time. He passed away in Jerusalem, leaving behind a kingdom with mounting internal and external pressures. His death not only left the throne to Baldwin IV, a child already grappling with leprosy, but also set the stage for political instability, as the regency would now become a crucial element of the kingdom's governance. Upon Amalric's death, the High Court convened to discuss the succession. Though he had not yet been diagnosed, the High Court must have been aware of the royal physician's suspicions that Baldwin had contracted leprosy. Yet there was no viable alternative. Baldwin was the king's only son. From his second marriage, Amalric had 2 daughters, of which only Isabella survived infancy. Female succession was expressly allowed, but Sibylla was an unmarried adolescent and Isabella only 2 years old. The male candidates, Amalric's cousins Prince Bohemond III of Antioch, Baldwin of Antioch, and Count Raymond III of Tripoli, were politically unsuitable. Bohemond was bound to distant Antioch, Baldwin in the service of Byzantine Emperor Manuel I Komnenos, and Raymond virtually a stranger to the barons after 9 years spent in Muslim captivity. After 3 days of deliberation, Baldwin IV was chosen, with the expectation that a husband would be found for Sibylla to succeed him if he proved to be affected. The young king's coronation by the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Amalric of Nesle, took place immediately in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Until he reached the age of majority, which was 15 in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Baldwin needed a regent to rule in his name. The government was initially assumed by the seneschal, Miles of Plancy. Shortly thereafter, Count Raymond III of Tripoli arrived in Jerusalem and succeeded in claiming regency as the king's closest kinsman. Miles was murdered while trying to extend his hold on the government. No new seneschal was appointed for 2 years, and so the young and sickly king presided over burdensome high court meetings when the regent was away on military duties or in Tripoli. As a leper, Baldwin could not marry or expect to have children. It thus became a priority to arrange a marriage for Baldwin's sister and heir presumptive, Sibylla, with William of Montferrat in November 1176, despite misgivings of the nobles who no longer trusted his cousin Emperor Frederick's ability to aid the kingdom. Baldwin offered to resign the throne to William. He declined because he knew he lacked the support of the nobility. Around the same time, Nur ad-Din Zengi, the powerful Sultan of the Zengid state and a formidable adversary to the Crusaders, passed away. His death triggered political instability in the Muslim territories, with internal disputes over succession creating divisions that temporarily allowed the Crusaders to stabilize their position. Saladin, then serving as the ruler of Egypt under Nur ad-Din's authority, quickly seized this opportunity. He began consolidating his power in the Levant, capitalizing on the weakened Zengid leadership. Within a few years, Saladin unified Egypt and Syria under his command, declaring himself Sultan and effectively sidelining the Zengid dynasty, which set the stage for a more direct confrontation with the Crusaders. On the second anniversary of his coronation, the 15th of July 1176, Baldwin reached the age of majority and Raymond's regency lapsed. The king appointed his loyal and capable maternal uncle, Jocelyn of Courtenay, to the office of seneschal and arranged for him to marry a rich heiress, Agnes of Milly. The change in government signaled a new Frankish approach to the Egyptian ruler Saladin, who had been allowed by Raymond to encircle the Crusader states by conquering Muslim principalities in Syria. Baldwin did not ratify Raymond's peace treaty with Saladin, firmly agreeing with Jocelyn that the Sultan's power needed to be curbed. As soon as he took over the government, Baldwin began planning a full-scale attack on Egypt with his advisors. The king took advantage of Saladin's campaign in Aleppo to lead a raid around Damascus. This was his first experience of warfare. Despite having use of only one hand, he refused to delegate his military duties and took part in fighting. He and his advisors then decided to intervene in Saladin's war against the Order of Assassins. On the 1st of August, Baldwin and Raymond led the armies of Jerusalem and Tripoli, respectively, in a raid of the Bequa Valley, modern-day Lebanon, where they defeated the garrison of Damascus, forcing Saladin to abandon his campaign. In order to carry out his attack on Egypt, Baldwin needed naval support. He thus sent Reynold of Chatillon to lead an embassy to Emperor Manuel, Reynold's stepson-in-law, in Constantinople in the winter of 1176–77. Manuel agreed to take part in the invasion in return for the establishment of Byzantine protectorate over the kingdom and restoration of the Orthodox Patriarch, Leontius II, in Jerusalem. As Reynold's mission was successful, Baldwin consented to his marriage with the Lady of Alta-Jourdain, Stephanie of Milly. In April 1177, William of Montferrat fell sick with malaria in Ascalon, of which he had been made count on his marriage to the king's sister. Baldwin visited him and became gravely ill too. William died in June, leaving Sibylla pregnant and Baldwin incapacitated without a deputy ahead of a major war offensive. The king entrusted the government and military command to Reynold, snubbing the Count of Tripoli. Baldwin's first cousin Count Philip I of Flanders arrived in the east in September. He brought to Baldwin financial aid from another cousin, King Henry II of England. Henry was invested because he and Baldwin both belonged to the Angevin family. Still in sickbed in Ascalon, the king had himself taken back to Jerusalem in a litter and convened a general council, on the advice of which he offered regency to Philip. Philip declined, and Reynold retained his post. The Byzantines sent a war fleet in preparation of the invasion of Egypt, but to Baldwin's regret they withdrew because of the uncooperativeness of Philip of Flanders, Bohemond of Antioch, Raymond of Tripoli, and the Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller, Roger de Moulins. Saladin's power remained unchecked, and the Byzantine alliance collapsed. Despite the hostility of the Latin Patriarch, Amalric of Nesle, Baldwin continued to court the Greek Patriarch, Leontius, in hopes that the Byzantines would remain committed to his kingdom. Philip left the Kingdom of Jerusalem with his troops in late October 1177 to help Raymond of Tripoli attack the Muslim-held city of Hama. With the Frankish army in northern Syria, Saladin seized the opportunity to invade Baldwin's kingdom on the 18th of November. Though still recovering from malaria, Baldwin rode to meet the Sultan, while the Knights Templar hurried to defend Gaza. The king took his humble host to Ascalon, where in desperation he issued an arriere ban, summoning all able-bodied men. Saladin reached Ascalon on the 22nd of November and Baldwin led the troops out to meet him. Seeing how drastically outnumbered he was, the king retreated into the city. Saladin too saw the strength in his numbers and confidently proceeded towards Jerusalem. Baldwin managed to contact the Templars, however, and ordered them to abandon Gaza and join him. Contrary to the Sultan's expectation, Baldwin and Reynold then rode out of Ascalon, joined up with the Templars, and attacked his dispersed army at Montgisard. The young king was in the forefront. Saladin, who barely survived, suffered a crushing defeat. Not having enough men to launch an offensive on the retreating Muslims, Baldwin decided to fortify the Damascene frontier. The Templars convinced him to build a castle, Chastelet, on the upper Jordan River. He was reluctant because the Franks had promised not to mark that part of the border. After protests of local Muslims, Saladin offered money to Baldwin in exchange for aborting the construction, but the king refused. In 1178, Baldwin hosted the Patriarch of the Syriac Orthodox Church, Michael the Syrian, in Jerusalem and won his lasting loyalty to Frankish cause. In April 1179, Baldwin intended to round up the sheep passing from Damascus to Banias. Saladin's nephew Farrukh Shah was sent to investigate the king's movement but suddenly ran into him, and a skirmish followed. The elderly but exceptionally able constable, Humphrey II of Tehran, sustained fatal wounds while protecting the king. Weeks later, Baldwin rode out to intercept Bedouin raids of Beirut and Sidon, and in June Saladin's raiding party routed Baldwin's. The king was unhorsed and carried to safety on a knight's back because he could not remount on his own. In late August, Baldwin summoned a host to Tiberias to respond to Saladin's siege of Le Chastelet, but the castle fell before the relic of the True Cross could be fetched from Jerusalem to accompany the Christian troops. In the winter of 1177–78, the king's widowed sister, Sibylla, gave birth to a son, Baldwin, named after the king. A year of official mourning for the child's father, William, concluded in June 1178, and it became appropriate to seek another husband for her. During the Holy Week in 1180, the Prince of Antioch and the Count of Tripoli marched with their armies to Jerusalem. It is most likely that their intention was to force the king to have Sibylla marry Baldwin of Ibelin and to then abdicate. The king had never approved of Baldwin's ambition to marry his sister, and though he did wish to abdicate, he was not keen on having terms forced on him. Baldwin acted decisively before his kinsman's armies reached Jerusalem. He arranged for Sibylla to marry a Poitevin knight, Guy of Lusignan. Raymond and Bohemond had no option but to accept the fait accompli, and the coup was foiled. In light of these problems, Baldwin proposed a 2-year truce with Saladin, who was glad to accept in order to campaign freely in northern Syria. Baldwin sent his uncle and chief minister, Jocelyn, to assure the Byzantine court that Jerusalem still needed their protection. During Jocelyn's absence, from mid-1180 to mid-1181, the full burden of government fell on the shoulders of the king, whose health was deteriorating. He relied chiefly on his mother in this period. To secure Guy's position and prevent the emergence of an alternative claimant, Baldwin had his 8-year-old half-sister, Isabella, solemnly betrothed to the teenage Lord of Tehran, Humphrey IV, in October 1180. Isabella was then sent to live at Karak Castle with the Lady of Olterjourdain, Humphrey's mother, as far as possible from her maternal kin and potential conspirators. By the terms of the marriage contract, Humphrey ceded Tehran to Baldwin, who thus prevented the union of two great fiefs under one vassal and strengthened his position against the Count of Tripoli. Baldwin made use of the truce with Saladin to strengthen the position of his maternal kin, granting Marin and Chastel-Neuf to Jocelyn and Usufruct of Tehran to Agnes, while associating Guy and Sibylla with him in public acts. He remained unreconciled with Raymond, however, and forbade the Count to enter the kingdom in early 1182 owing to suspicions of another conspiracy. Baldwin likely intended to charge Raymond with treason and deprive him of the Principality of Galilee, a fief of Jerusalem held by Raymond through marriage to Esquiva of Buez. The law prevented the king from seizing the fief without the assent of the High Court, and the High Court urged the king to reconcile with Raymond. Baldwin reluctantly heeded his vassal's advice. Baldwin's truce with Saladin was due to expire in May 1182, but was broken in mid-1181 by Raynald, who seized a merchant caravan on its way from Egypt to Damascus. Raynald ignored the king's request to make restitution to Saladin, who was then preparing to annex the Zengid-ruled Aleppo. The king, who consistently acted against Saladin's attempts to expand into northern Syria, decided to oppose him. The recent anti-Catholic coup in Constantinople gave Saladin confidence to attack the Kingdom of Jerusalem. In July, Baldwin marched with his host to relieve the Muslims' siege of Bethsan, and his outnumbered army won the Battle of Leper King. The defeated Sultan took his host to besiege Beirut, while another army from Egypt attacked the south of the kingdom. Baldwin knew that he was being provoked into dividing his forces. Deciding that Beirut was of a greater strategic importance, he ignored the southern attack and moved with his troops to Tyre. From there, he procured assistance from the Italian maritime republics in lifting Saladin's naval blockade of Beirut. Saladin abandoned the siege, but declined to make a truce, worrying Baldwin and his advisors. He proceeded north to fight the Zengids, thereby expanding his realm, while Baldwin led an attack on Saladin's Damascene territory, then on Bosra, before finally laying siege and capturing Cave de South. In the winter of 1182 to 1183, after agreeing on a strategy with his council, Baldwin attacked Damascus again. He threatened to destroy a mosque in Daraa, but local Christians convinced him not to for fear of losing their churches in retaliation. Baldwin could not walk unsupported or use his hands from 1183. Because of an inability to blink, his cornea dried and he became blind. He nevertheless had to summon his troops in response to Saladin's march south following the Egyptian conquest of Aleppo in June. The king then developed a life-threatening fever. He was attended by his mother and the new patriarch, Heraclius, at nearby Nazareth. Having summoned the high court to his bedside, Baldwin entrusted the government to his brother-in-law, Guy, who was next in line to succeed him. Guy's appointment to regency was meant to be permanent. Baldwin retained only the royal title and authority over the city of Jerusalem, but he had Guy swear that, while Baldwin lived, he would not make himself king or alienate parts of the royal domain. Fearing discontent among his barons, Baldwin had failed to give Guy any experience in military leadership prior to making him regent. Indeed, the great lords of the kingdom, the independent rulers of Antioch and Tripoli, and the Grand Masters of the military orders refused to cooperate with Guy. Baldwin recovered unexpectedly and returned to Jerusalem. Having found that coastal climate suited his health, Baldwin offered Jerusalem to Guy in exchange for Tyre. Guy brusquely refused, possibly because Tyre was more lucrative, leaving Baldwin gravely insulted. The wedding of Baldwin's half-sister, Isabella, and Humphrey IV of Tehran was celebrated in Kerak in late 1183. Saladin attacked during the festivities and laid siege to the castle. The retired king had gathered a council in Jerusalem to inform him about the government of the kingdom when news about the siege reached him. He immediately dismissed Guy from regency and resumed power, as the defense of such a vital fortress and the king's half-sister within it could not be entrusted to the man who had proven unable to command the troops. Guy's removal from regency was effectively disinheritance. At the council's insistence, deliberations about the succession followed. The proposal of the king's mother that Sibilla's 5-year-old son, Baldwin, be made co-king was accepted, and the boy was crowned on the 20th of November. In late November, Baldwin ordered the lighting of a beacon on the Tower of David, which may have been the first in a chain of such beacons, in order to hearten the defenders of the intensely bombarded Kerak. Baldwin accompanied his troops again, but having become blind and immobile, this time he went in a litter slung between 2 horses. His presence was essential to unite the discordant barons. Even his humiliated brother-in-law led his men. Warned by his scouts about the king's approach and concerned about having left Egypt unguarded, Saladin abandoned the siege on the 4th of December. Baldwin entered Kerak triumphantly. The question of regency for his nephew troubled Baldwin. The only way to ensure that Guy could not claim it was to have his marriage to Sibilla annulled. Baldwin discussed this with the patriarch, Heraclius. The king may have intended to claim that he had forced his sister to marry Guy and that the marriage was unlawful because of that. Sibylla's unwavering loyalty to Guy thwarted his plans, as the couple refused to appear at court. Early in 1184, Baldwin ordered Guy to attend him as vassal in Jerusalem. Guy declined, citing poor health, and this was repeated several times. Baldwin then had himself carried to Ascalon in the company of the High Court. Guy refused to let him into the city. From the battlements and towers, the inhabitants witnessed the king ceremoniously raise his hand to knock on the gates and demand admission only for the gates to remain closed. The king was welcomed in Jaffa, however, where he installed a governor, thereby depriving Guy of half of his county. In Acre, Baldwin summoned his council, probably to gain support to seize Guy's fief on the grounds of refusal of the royal summons. The Patriarch and the Grand Masters begged Baldwin to forgive Guy in order to avoid a civil war. This was as unacceptable to Baldwin as it would have been to any contemporary king. The Patriarch and the Grand Masters stormed out of the council, swaying the rest of the assembly to withhold support for the action. Baldwin was reconciled with the Patriarch and the Grand Masters by June when he sent them to Europe on a diplomatic mission to seek aid for the kingdom. He informed them by letter that Saladin was once more besieging Kerak. Again, Saladin abandoned the siege when the litter-bound king approached with his army. Once in Kerak, Baldwin ordered and financed the reparations of the damaged castle. In late 1184, Baldwin was shocked to learn about Guy's massacre of the Bedouin of the royal fief of Dharam, who were under royal protection and who provided information about the Egyptians' movements. He soon developed a fever. When he returned to Jerusalem in late 1184 or early 1185, Baldwin bestowed regency on Raymond of Tripoli, the man whom he had never trusted, but to whom he could find no better alternative. At the time, he expected to survive the illness, having done so twice before, but within weeks it became apparent that it would be his last. On his deathbed he summoned the High Court to appoint a permanent regent for his nephew, Baldwin V, and Raymond was chosen. The dying king then ordered that homage be rendered to his nephew as king and to Raymond as regent, to be followed by a solemn crown-wearing ceremony at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Baldwin IV died, attended by his vassals, in March 1185 or before the 16th of May 1185 at the latest, when Baldwin V is recorded as the sole king. He was buried in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, close to his father, King Amalric. The young Baldwin V died the next year. Sibylla, who succeeded her son, made Guy king. Baldwin IV's realm was destroyed by Saladin following his decisive victory over Guy at the Horns of Hattin in 1187. Sibylla and her daughters died in 1190, leaving Isabella I as the heir to the defeated kingdom. Christian defeat at Hattin 2 years after Baldwin's death marred the king's legacy, with historians tracing fatal discord to Baldwin's reign. Yet, while Baldwin was on the throne, the kingdom lost no territory and flourished economically and spiritually. Baldwin understood the importance of curbing Saladin's power, which was reflected in his choice of ministers. He did not devise strategy or diplomacy alone, and delegated church patronage and finances to his mother, Agnes, and uncle, Jocelyn, respectively. His chief contribution was his determination not to abdicate before finding a suitable successor, despite leprosy making government an unbearable burden. As was clear during his reign and especially in its disastrous aftermath, Baldwin alone preserved unity in the kingdom. Baldwin's public image may have been aided by his chastity, seen as evidence of extraordinary sanctity, and his success against Saladin was interpreted as a sign of God's favor. After the disastrous Seventh Crusade, a crusader was told by an old man in Damascus, "I have seen a time when King Baldwin of Jerusalem, the one who was a leper, beat Saladin although he only had 300 armed men against Saladin's 3,000. But now your sins have come to such a pass that we round you up in the fields like cattle." Despite perceived sanctity, Baldwin was not particularly devout. He was primarily a knight, both in character and in upbringing, and to contemporaries his most distinctive traits were his courage and honorableness. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video helpful and inspiring. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know what topics you'd like to see next. Until then, keep striving for success, and see you in the next video.